equally gifted and heroic as his contemporary,
Solid Snake.
we're going to be speaking about a character who went from the redheaded stepchild of the series to a beloved fan favorite.
Hello.
To keep from retreading ground, it is not required, but it is recommended you watch Metal Gear Solid Lore for Beginners. This is a companion piece to that video. I'm going to be speaking about in-game events as if you know what they are, and I'm also going to be speaking about real-world events that give deep context to Raiden as a character. So for that, this earns the first ever Chipmunku-chan content warning. We're going to be speaking about real men who have cemented themselves as some of the most haunted people in modern history. So, join me on a deep dive on how Raiden started as a fresh-faced foxhound and ended his journey as the muscle of Maverick. Let's begin. Today marks one of the most devastating periods in Liberia's history. As just 9 years ago, Liberian politician Samuel Canyon Doe had staged a coup. This was the result of a rebellion in 1980. In wake of this move, he would appoint Charles Taylor as director of the General Services Agency. This would see some of the most important purchasing decisions made in the name of the Liberian government. Unrest grew quite quickly with Doe in charge. Development stagnated, and Doe grew paranoid of falling victim to the same gauntlet that placed him in power. In May of 1983, Charles Taylor was fired from his position for stealing an estimated $1 billion. Just a year later, Taylor would flee to the United States in fear of imprisonment, and on the 21st of May, 1984, he would face a warrant for extradition to face his charges of embezzlement, and while serving his sentence for only 4 years, he would eventually escape prison and flee to Libya. It would be here which he would be trained by revolutionary Muammar al-Gaddafi in the art of guerrilla warfare. Taylor would return to Liberia with a swath of rebels assembled in the Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast. In this rebellion, titled the NPFL, invaded Nimba County on the 24th of December, 1989. And it was here which, in retaliation, the Liberia army opened fire on the entirety of the region. Most of the people belonging to the Mandingo tribe were largely unarmed, and as their villages burned, civilians turned to neighboring countries for refuge. But the NPFL, they were enraged. Seeking retribution for those innocent lives lost, Charles Taylor swore vengeance against Canyon Doe and the Liberian government as a whole.
Charles Taylor is only the mechanism for what you want.
This would mark the beginning of a near decade-long war that would end the lives of nearly 200,000 people. Decades later, in 2012, Charles Taylor, aged 64, would be facing a 50-year prison sentence. A direct quote from Judge Richard Lussick on regarding his sentence states the following.
The accused has been found responsible for aiding and abetting as well as planning some of the most heinous and brutal crimes in recorded human history.
It is during that same war, the bloodiest era in Liberia's history, we'd see one such child. On a rainy day in the turbulent Ivory Coast was Jack. Jack had no chance at a normal childhood. Introduced into this maelstrom through the grisly murder of his parents by U.S. military officer George Sears, a man born, or rather created in 1972 as the perfectly balanced somatic cell clone of Big Boss. George would assert himself as the boy's godfather, and Jack would be one of the first of many names insisted upon him. And this marks the beginning of a hell no one should endure.
I don't know. No.
The Small Boy Unit is one of Metal Gear's most morbid corners of lore. Belonging to the larger Army of the Devil, a military group participating in the First Liberian Civil War. Not unlike its real-world counterpart, the Small Boy Unit was an organization of child soldiers led by Sears. Jack was quickly absorbed by the unit, seeing his first battle before the age of 5. Not long after, he would pick up a rifle and become one of the most prominent forces in the organization. He would rise through the ranks with bone-crunching efficiency, landing him the position of captain of the unit. This wasn't the end of Sears' misdeeds. In order to keep control of his child army, he'd mix their food with gunpowder, force them to watch movies with violent imagery, and would go so far as to force them to kill POWs and civilians caught in their path.
Here, it's yours. Now, blow out the candles.
10 of them. One for each year of my life.
And Jack had such a high body count at the age of 10, people began to refer to him as the White Devil. White Devil being the more obvious name, as he was one of the few Caucasians in the unit, but his Ripper moniker would come from his proficiency with a blade.
The White Devil. Jack the Ripper. My loyal little soldier. That's my little Jack the Ripper.
This, coupled with his excessive cruelty, earned him the accolades he would hold until his involvement with the war would be swept under the rug. A secret to the world, and soon, even himself. Jack's reputation had already superseded him. Finding foster care that would saddle the task of raising him proved immensely difficult. The children he'd be leaving behind in Liberia would never learn to read or write. With no way to support themselves, they would turn to violence again, likely nursing their chronic traumatic stress with drug addictions. This trauma itself would manifest in many different ways. A few examples are PTSD and some severe personality disorders. Jack, with proper care, would be one of the lucky ones. A non-governmental organization had extracted him and all of the small boy unit from Liberia without George's knowledge, and it was here where he underwent a dizzying amount of counseling to at the very least keep appearances as a mentally sound individual. This stroke of luck would prove to be a double-edged sword, though. He was the perfect candidate for the Patriots, a shadow organization with a near-complete control of the United States. Therefore, he was selected for a set of experiments that would involve invasive augmentations of his body and mind. Implanted in his cerebral cortex were an intrusive amount of nanomachines, which would have him serve as a backup system for George Washington, GW, an optic neural AI designed to maintain the Patriots' control over the United States. These nanomachines served a dual purpose, capable of memory manipulation through the connection and stimulation of synapses through the dormant areas of the brain. This would wipe his memory of his time in Liberia, but would also stabilize Jack in waking day,
There's a lot I don't remember from my past.
once again rendering him an able-bodied citizen. This, though, was at the cost of daily nightmares, his subconscious still manifesting flashbacks from his youth. You see, the Patriots had selected Jack for a multitude of reasons. Jack condemned his past vehemently, refusing to acknowledge his atrocities. In the Master AI's own words, he turns his back on anything he doesn't like.
Our beloved monsters, enjoy yourselves.
But most importantly to the Patriots were his lack of documentation. Thanks to the expunging of the US involvement in the Civil War, there was no such database in which he now existed, making him a digital ghost and a perfect puppet for the Patriots. Upon his return to the United States, Jack would enlist into the military. His skills would eventually catch the eye of the United States Army, specifically the Task Force 21, an experimental cutting-edge program that hosted a rigorous set of exercises conducted by the US Army. And by the 1990s, the TF-21 exercises had incorporated virtual reality into their selective training regiment. Raiden in particular had undergone these trials during his stint as a solo Special Forces officer, going on record to have participated in over 300 VR simulations, some of which were recreations of the Shadow Moses incident in 2005 and the Manhattan Tanker incident in 2007. He would shortly leave the force by January 20th. Jack then would eventually be transferred to Fort Hamilton in the Bureau of New York City. And on April 30th, 2007, in front of Federal Hall, he'd overhear a conversation. A group of men asked a woman which building King Kong had climbed in the movie. She replied that it was probably the Chrysler Building. Jack rounded the corner to correct her, claiming that it was the Empire State. The two argued for such an extended period of time that the men had disbanded. And to settle their argument, they both went to the Skyscraper Museum in Battery Park to learn who was correct. But unfortunately for the pair, the building was closed. A week later, the two did meet again, and the woman revealing herself to be Rosemary, an intelligence analyst working for the Pentagon at the same military compound. Clearly feeling a connection, Jack asked her out on a date to the Empire State. This would mark the beginning of a 2-year relationship and an eventual marriage. Jack, with not much infiltration experience, was employed by the now non-existent Foxhound to enter the decontamination facility of Big Shell. Guided by the colonel of the group, Roy Campbell, Jack is sent to Lower Manhattan Harbor to rescue multiple hostages, including the US President James Johnson from the Sons of Liberty. The beginning of this mission is where he'd be assigned his true codename, Raiden.
What's wrong with Snake?
Just a precaution. You are now designated Raiden.
As being referred to as Snake would prove confusing, especially with Solidus taking the moniker of Solid Snake.
Metal Gear.
In terms of the operation, SEAL Team Alpha shared the same orders as Raiden: dispatch threats and rescue the president, while SEAL Team Bravo would be meeting with Peter Stillman, a bomb disposal expert. This was in order to eliminate any threat of explosives placed within the facility. SEAL Team 10 would airdrop onto the site and rendezvous with Raiden, while he alone would infiltrate by sea. Now, Raiden, not unlike the genome soldiers from Shadow Moses, had been augmented for this task, having his blood fully drained and replenished with a nanite-infused substitute, allowing him to dive in sub-freezing temperatures. And it would be through the Hudson River that Raiden plunged deep into the premises of Big Shell. Before he made it into the heart of the facility, he discovered a chain-link fence with a newly cut hole, implying he wasn't the first to infiltrate. Following the clues left behind, he found a room of unconscious guards and an unknown figure rising within an elevator. Raiden quickly dispatches the colonel and relays the information, and Campbell informs Raiden that he's the only person tasked with this very specific route. Whoever's here, they're not on record, and that is where the fear starts to seep in. Raiden's only ever completed VR sessions. He's never set foot on a stealth mission. He's already out of his depth. Someone has matched his wits, knowing the ins and outs of the compound, and taking stealth with an extreme proficiency. It could only mean one thing. This guy? Kind of a big deal. It was also at this time that Roy let loose that he selected the perfect candidate to analyze Big Shell's systems: Rosemary. Raiden, obviously infuriated with the decision, as a mission of this magnitude could easily see her life in danger.
She's never been a part of a field mission. This is insane.
But both Raiden and Rose had set boundaries of what terms to accept and what orders to take. Only those facing the Sons of Liberty directly should be putting their lives on the line. Alpha Team had successfully located the president, with one major issue. A mysterious figure had launched an assault on the crew before they could extract. Their transmissions cut out before they could dispatch their location, prompting Raiden to carry out his leg of the mission. Running down to Strut B in hopes of the rendezvous, what Raiden would find instead was a massacre. Bodies filled the halls, clearly that of Alpha Team. To make matters worse, the president had vanished. And likely, the killer was still lingering at this location. It was clear that the murder of SEAL Team Alpha was carried out by Dead Cell member Vamp, and Raiden would have been the next victim had it not been for the mysterious stranger that he met in the elevator.
Get down!
That stranger? Navy SEAL Iroquois Pliskin, Lieutenant Junior Grade. He informed Raiden about his attacker and the origin of Dead Cell. Pliskin, being a man of many talents, noted that Raiden was a member of the defunct Foxhound, likely something only a previous member would know.
That suit, are you Foxhound?
And Raiden, making the connections, likened the hole earlier to be made by Pliskin. Understanding the gravity of the situation and the legend who stood before him, he accepted his help. And Pliskin would bestow Raiden with his iconic Heckle & Koch Mark 23, a SOCOM pistol. And as he handed him this, Pliskin told him to complete his extraction. It was on this route to the president where Raiden witnessed another slaughter by Dead Cell leader Fortune.
What the hell is that?
Eventually, Raiden would come across Peter Stillman, the bomb defusal expert from before. Peter tasked Raiden and Pliskin with the mission of freezing the C4 detonators to delay any immediate dangers. and they would take their time making a plan of their own. But unfortunately, in this operation, Stillman discovered a proximity microwave-triggered bomb that would eventually take his life. This would also destroy most of Shell 2, and when Raiden would finally find the man responsible, Fat Man, he would defeat him in combat. And as he did so, his ultimate C4 package was left untriggered, saving the facility and likely Raiden's life.
Dud. As in worthless and broken. As in you, jag-off.
Moments before his death, Fat Man explained of a forged $30 billion ransom.
If you destroy the big shell, you'll never collect your ransom.
Ransom? What are you talking about?
$30 billion in cash.
So that's what's going on.
What the hell are you talking about?
Being planted misinformation from the Patriots for the S3 plan, a coordinated event by the group to shape selected individuals into super soldiers on par with Solid Snake. This was the first hint that Raiden would get that something about the entire mission was deeply wrong.
The way you phrase that makes this seem like
Enough!
this is...
I won't tolerate any more insubordination. I'll say this only one time. You will follow my orders with utmost precision, or you will be court-martialed and thrown into the brig upon your return. Now, do you get me?
So, Raiden, after dealing with Fat Man, once again plunged into the core of Shell 1.
The hostages are being held in the B1 conference hall. In the Shell 1 core, you'll find Ames there.
Disguising himself to bypass security and reach Colonel Richard Ames. Once they were united, it was revealed to him that Pliskin was the real Solid Snake.
No! That is not Solid Snake!
Who faked his death after the failure of the tanker incident. And he also learned that the Patriots had constructed Big Shell to house
Arsenal Gear. That's the code name for the new Metal Gear.
a massive warship, and that Big Shell acted as perfect camouflage. But Arsenal wasn't solely armed by the Patriots. Emma Emmerich, Otacon's half-sister, acted as the de facto AI engineer. The damage was already done. Vamp had stabbed her and she had succumbed to her injuries. Laying her to rest and swearing vengeance on her killer, it spurred deep emotions, long buried. Did Raiden enjoy the thought of killing someone? He couldn't shake the awful feeling.
Snake, have you ever enjoyed killing someone?
What are you talking about?
Eventually, Raiden and Snake were able to plant a virus into George Washington. But before they could celebrate their victory, Snake double-crossed Raiden, who was quickly subdued and captured by Olga Gerlukovich, where which she ushered Raiden on board to Arsenal Gear. See, Olga's daughter was held captive by the Patriots, and Snake needed to infiltrate Arsenal. So to do that, they needed Raiden's biometric data to gain access. And they were not gambling on the idea of him refusing. So to make matters convincing, Olga roughs up Raiden, and shortly after, he'd be called by Rosemary. Finally, he confesses and divulges about his childhood in Liberia to her, explaining his cold nature and apprehensiveness towards compassion, driving their relationship to contention. Slowly but surely, Raiden began to suspect that George perhaps played a major role in his selection for the S3 plan. Shortly after, Raiden would be awoken, strapped to a torture bed. Not unlike Solid Snake in the Shadow Moses mission, Solidus, accompanied by Ocelot, watched over him. Solidus explained to Raiden that he knew him well. Everything he learned, including his thirst for blood, came from him. And while torturing Raiden, his past came flooding to the center of his mind, and in excruciating pain and detail, his sins washed over him, consuming him. Eventually, Olga would return, telling Raiden she was sent by the Patriots to save him. She had not even met her child.
My child is being held hostage by the Patriots.
The Patriots were so swift and cruel with her abduction, stating that a failure in this mission would result in its death. So she would release Raiden and told him Snake awaited him.
Brace yourself.
And while sneaking through Arsenal Gear, Raiden began to get transmissions from the Colonel, each one a little stranger than the last.
I hear it's amazing when the famous purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw Space with the tuning fork does a raw blink on Harry Carey Rock. I need scissors. 61.
Not able to make heads or tails of the codec calls, Raiden pushed through, with growing suspicions in the back of his mind. With no choice but to carry on, he eventually made a rendezvous with Snake, and as the two shared a moment, the silence was cut by a call from Rosemary. Unexpectedly, she had something to confess.
Jack, I owe you an apology. That day at Federal Hall 2 years ago, it wasn't a coincidence. I was ordered to keep an eye on you.
Keep an eye on me?
Yes, by the Patriots.
Rose had been a Patriot spy since the very moment that they met. Her mission was to romance Raiden and keep close tabs on him.
Jack, I fell in love with you.
Shut up! I don't want to hear this bullshit. You reported every detail of my personal life to those bastards for the last 2 years.
In other words, Rose was Raiden's Patriot babysitter. Though she did admit that through the time that they spent together, her feelings grew. She felt a genuine love for Jack, the man she met at Federal Hall.
Jack, I thought I was acting because that was my job, but I did fall in love with you. That wasn't an act.
You expect me to believe that?
Raiden, seething from this betrayal, lashed in frustration. But before he could gain any closure, Rosemary admitted to a bombshell.
I'm carrying. I'm pregnant, Jack.
Rose, what's going on?
She was pregnant with Jack's child. Raiden's world began to collapse around him, and slowly he shambled his way to Snake, who would bequeath to him Olga's high-frequency blade. And Raiden, not wasting a moment, asked if someone could check in on the Colonel. His messages had left him deeply concerned, and Snake patched into Otacon to investigate.
Raiden, about this colonel of yours. I found out where he is.
Where?
Inside Arsenal.
What?
And the encryption protocol it uses is exactly the same as that of Arsenal's AI, the so-called GW.
What the hell does this mean?
I think it means you've been talking to an AI.
AI on par with mimicking the full range of human behavior, fed with the data of Jack's memories. He received another message from the AI.
Colonel, who are you? No more questions. We have Rosemary.
What do you mean by that?
Over and out.
What? Rose? Colonel! Colonel, answer me, you son of a bitch!
Raiden's reality was beginning to shatter. What could he trust? Was Rosemary in danger? Was Rosemary even real? All that time together, was it a fabricated memory? Who was Raiden? Who was Jack? Snake stepped in to stop the spiral.
Don't you get uppity with me, kid. Find something to believe in and find it for yourself. And when you do, pass it on to the future.
Believe in what?
That's your problem.
There was immediate danger and they needed to act upon it. Therefore, the two descended through Arsenal, and eventually the two were stopped by Fortune, who claimed that Snake was the true enemy and a spearhead of her life's ruin.
You consigned me to hell when you murdered him.
Snake obliged to duel her and left Raiden to continue with his mission. And eventually, Raiden himself would land at the core, met with many copies of Metal Gear Ray units, redesigned from the Navy by the Patriots to be mass-produced. And this staggering amount of Rays would prove to be too much for Raiden, collapsing before defeating them all. Luckily, Olga was able to step in to save his life as she decried Solidus, and therefore, she was killed for her rebellion.
Live! You have to!
Olga!
Her last words to Raiden were for him to live. And just as Solidus planned to finish what he started, the virus affecting GW's core took effect, and the whole thing came crashing down.
What's going on? What's wrong with it? GW, it's out of control. What?
Arsenal crashed upon Manhattan, and on its way down, Raiden began to learn his role in life. A puppet for the Patriots, with the entirety of the Big Shell mission being a simulation to create another Solid Snake. And now, the similarities between Big Shell and Shadow Moses became glaringly obvious. This was a setup. AI constructions of both Rose and Roy Campbell ordered Raiden to eliminate Solidus.
Our beloved monsters, enjoy yourselves.
At the threat of killing Olga's child and their own, and Raiden swore to the AI himself that this would be the last command he'd ever follow from the Patriots. And as he stood atop Federal Hall, he met with George one last time. Sears explained to Raiden that he would be the one to destroy the Patriots, but that would mean killing Raiden. The backup of GW was the only version left, and if it's stored in Raiden's cerebral cortex, well, there was only one option of getting it back. And after their bone-crunching fight, Raiden would prove victorious. With Solidus falling from Federal Hall lifeless. The Patriots were sated, and the world, for now, would be saved. When the dust has settled, Raiden spoke to Snake, who assured him that he was the master of his own destiny, and no shadow organization could strip him of his humanity. Inspired, Raiden offered to help philanthropy, he and Otacon's group, but Snake declined. Raiden had his entire life in front of him. If anything, it was time to get affairs in order and think about putting the gun down. He knew what was coming. So, reluctantly, Raiden swallowed his fear and his anger and accosted Rosemary. Still madly in love, he forgave Rose's betrayal in the face of the world's most dangerous organization. And with the prospect of starting a family in a newly safe nation, Raiden agreed to stay with Rose. And together, they would begin a new chapter. Deciding to finally settle down, Jack and Rosemary move in together, with plans to raise their child away from the atrocities they'd both witnessed.
You need to see me for who I am, okay?
I will. For you. For our child.
Is that a proposal?
The downtime, with no pun intended, was a double-edged sword for Jack. The high-frequency blades would prove to haunt Raiden. After the Big Shell incident, he became a captive to his fascination to Japanese swordsmanship. He subjected himself to rigorous training regimens, and this obsession sunk so deep, in order to understand samurai code, Jack went so far as to watch samurai movies in his spare time. He also used this newfound downtime to research the Patriot AI systems. One instance had burned a hole within his mind. Given how advanced the artificial intelligence proved to be, it begged the question, was the entity he spoke with during his time in Manhattan a sentient being? Or was the programming so convincing he'd been fooled to believing they acted upon their own desires? If the latter were true, the implications were dire. It would prove the Patriots to be much more sinister than he even previously imagined. Jack's quiet life with Rose would prove to be short-lived. Those fleeting moments of peace were perforated by his memories of time in Liberia.
After the Big Shell incident, he became unstable. Memories began to resurface from his childhood when he fought for Solidus in the Liberian Civil War.
As we mentioned when speaking about the child soldiers of Civil War, Jack too turned to substance abuse. Nightly fights predicated troublesome mornings, and Rosemary was living in fear.
I'm worried about him, of course, but I'm also afraid of him.
It was clear this cycle couldn't continue. Jack had to leave.
Jack, are you okay?
What is it you want with me? Oh my God.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Rose, I'm so sorry. I have no idea where that came from.
And he did, breaking all his ties and ending his relationship with Rose. The final straw for their affair came in the form of a miscarriage, or at the very least, the rumor of one. Once hearing that their unborn child had passed, it sent Jack overboard.
Jack, don't!
Quiet, Rose!
Seeing as he had already left Rose, he abandoned any hope of rekindling their romance. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that at this point Jack had fully become Raiden, a wandering Ronin who trusted no one else but himself. This lined him up perfectly for his next gig with Big Mama and the Paradise Lost Army. Sonny Gerlukovich, someone Raiden felt responsible for, had been held captive in Area 51.
I used to work with the guy. He saved Sonny from the Patriots.
He disappeared soon after that.
Big Mama was willing to mobilize her troops to aid Raiden in a rescue mission on the condition that he surrender the location of Big Boss stored within his brain's GW AI backup. And he agreed to the deal, and the extraction went smoothly. Following the Big Shell incident, Roy Campbell grew more and more concerned for Raiden's mental condition. It was during these bouts of PTSD from his childhood that Roy reached out to offer assistance. Oftentimes, Raiden would deflect or altogether avoid Campbell's offer for help.
Roy was worried. He was Jack's commanding officer, but Jack just avoided him. I was all alone.
And seeing Raiden's behavior become more unpredictable and violent, Campbell sought to protect Rosemary and her son from these outbursts. Together, they concocted a plan, one that would shield their child from the Patriots. Their best course of action would be to strike it from any databases and inform Raiden its only other tie with a falsified death. Campbell then severed all ties to Raiden and staked a fake marriage between he and Rosemary. This would allow Raiden to drop his life and pursue the Patriots with renewed rage and vigor. And with the safety of Rose's child at stake, Campbell played this as close to the chest as possible. Not even Meryl, his own niece, knew the truth of the matter, and this nearly ended their relationship.
He's not my father.
Yeah, I believe her words were, "I'll never forgive that womanizing piece of shit."
I see.
See, Campbell not only protected the mother and child, but often encouraged Rosemary to pursue her dream career in psychological counseling.
After that, she studied psychology. And now she's a counselor with CSP, the Combat Stress Platoon.
So long as Roy Campbell stood, the Patriots would not ruin this family. After the raid, Raiden had left Sonny in the care of Otacon and Snake under an anonymous guise. Listless, he wandered the globe seeking a greater purpose. And this led to stints of mercenary work and serious soul-searching, bringing him to indigenous Alaska, where he learned hunting techniques and general scoutings from Native American shamans. This would aid him in his next big mission, seeing himself retrieve Big Boss's remains for Paradise Lost. However, those skills would prove inadequate in the wrath of the Patriots, resulting in his capture and brutal torture. Raiden underwent another slew of unethical experimentation, chiefly the exoskeletal enhancement surgery. Continuing Tokugawa Heavy Industries' work on Gray Fox, Raiden would serve as the Patriots' fully realized enhanced humanoid project. His head and spine were, quote, excised from his body from his lower jaw down and subsequently grafted into an enhanced synthetic body. The technology included in these experiments equipped Raiden with muscle enhancements far beyond human capabilities, white blood, a vastly more oxygen-efficient liquid. It would need to be externally dialysized to avoid autotoxemia and would be routinely replaced upon injury. In many ways, robot dialysis. An artificial larynx. Regardless of Raiden's physical state, enunciators were installed to relay messages in case of danger should he be too weakened to speak.
I am lightning. The rain transformed.
And pain inhibitors, to the point of pain merely being a suggestion to his body to flee should he be destroyed. A full year later, Raiden, with the aid of Big Mama, successfully escaped the captivity. And during this rescue, Big Boss's remains were also recovered. And in a safe space to do so, Raiden underwent surgery to flush his body of Patriot nanomachines. The man to both discover and remove them was series veteran Drago Petrovich Madnar.
Dr. Madnar, he saved my life.
A man of interest during the events of Metal Gear 1 and 2. Although now clear of Patriot control, his augmentations proved to be too severe for him to ever live life again as a normal human being. And Raiden, understanding his fate, chose the option to disappear from his family, his compatriots, and public life altogether. Raiden resurfaces in the jungles of South America, breaking his silence from the war in the form of a codec call to Solid Snake.
Snake, can you hear me?
This is Jack, isn't it?
I am Raiden. Jack is no more.
Where are you now?
I'm right beside you.
Warning him of an oncoming PMC ambush. In the midst of Raiden explaining his whereabouts for the last few years, his call with Snake cuts.
We'll finish this later. I'll follow your trail and catch up with you.
It would only be after hearing Solid had defeated Laughing Octopus that Raiden would be able to reestablish a connection. And together, they were tasked with tracking down geneticist Dr. Naomi Hunter. His time spent in native Alaska would finally prove useful in tracking her location. And when they did finally drop in, Raiden revealed his newly manufactured body and swordsmanship skills to Snake. Subdued only by excessive force, he met again with Vamp, Emma's killer, who stabbed him to test his artificial blood replacement. The two shared a snide remark of their shared immortality before finally being freed.
No, I just don't fear death.
Seeing this as an opportunity to strike, he and Vamp engage in a battle to the death. The fight's intense, with Vamp the first to fall. And as he does, Raiden boards Snake's helicopter to escape, requesting that Snake see Big Mama in Europe.
Snake, Raiden. Europe.
See, the three would eventually find themselves on the Nomad, Snake, Otacon, and Sunny's transport aircraft.
Now, let it cook for 1 minute.
Where he'd undergo dialysis once again. Hearing that Solid was heading for Shadow Moses to defeat Liquid Ocelot, Raiden couldn't take it anymore.
You have a family.
I have no family.
He begged Solid to let him join. Killing Liquid would mean ending the Patriots, a solace he'd never felt in his 30-odd years of living. And much to his dismay, Solid once again declined.
This is my fight. My destiny.
This mission was his, and his alone. Not taking no for an answer, Raiden pursued Snake after his recovery, sneaking into Shadow Moses and subsequently saving Snake from a Gecko ambush. Seeking to put an end to Vamp's reign of terror, the two fought atop the original Metal Gear Rex, where eventually, Raiden would defeat his fated adversary. And as Vamp fell in a heap, Otacon's Mark II dispatched the condition of the Fox Alive virus from Sunny to Naomi.
Good for you, Sonny. You finally did it.
Which resulted in Naomi activating her nanomachine suppressors to eliminate both herself and Vamp. Sacrificing her life for the good of the world. There wasn't any time to grieve. Geckos were due for another ambush. So, Snake and Raiden took to the Metal Gear Rex to delay their attackers. Barreling their way down a tunnel to get to Liquid Ocelot, Snake had no choice but to continue to pursue Liquid, leaving Raiden behind. Snake would continue the path, eventually fighting Liquid Ocelot, piloting a Metal Gear Ray.
It's not over. Not yet.
And Raiden, to free himself, dismembered his arm and took off towards Solid. Raiden would spot that Solid, near death's door, was soon to be crushed by a recently erected outer haven. And Raiden, making that bold sacrifice, stood before the massive warship and momentarily held it in place.
Snake! Hurry!
Buying Snake time to escape, and barely holding back the vessel, his thoughts turned to Rosemary. After Outer Haven had departed, Raiden would be recovered. He'd survived the impossible, and through Otacon's opinion, he'd be advised to go no further. His sacrifice was not in vain, but this would be his last stop. Raiden obviously did not stop. While Snake infiltrated the ship, Raiden snuck aboard, and at this point he's missing both arms and wields his sword betwixt his teeth. His first task would be to stop a group of Haven troopers from reaching Solid Snake. And this would be the first time anyone saw Raiden's newfound electric lightning-like powers. And eventually the two would find each other back to back at the entrance of the infamous Microwave Hall. The Fox Alive virus needed to be installed into GW to destroy the Patriots, and Raiden asserted himself as the one to go. His body would be immune to the perils that awaited. But once again, Snake, a martyr for a greater cause, insisted he be the man to make the trek.
It's my duty to put an end to all of this.
And while Snake endured an unknowable pain, Raiden would hold his would-be attackers at bay. The world depended on the two, and the men's worlds crumbled at their feet in real time. Snake succumbing to his injuries and Raiden failing to keep steady ground. Things looked grim. This was nearly the end, had it not been for a last-moment success.
We did it!
The virus had been uploaded, and as it did, every GW nanomachine would deactivate, saving Raiden's life. And with the world at peace, Raiden was admitted to a hospital at an undisclosed location. If the novels are to be taken into account, likely somewhere in Maryland. Now equipped with a rudimentary artificial skin to pass as a normal human being, he would spend a month in recovery. And during that stint, he would be visited by Rose and their child, John. He had not ever heard that his child had made it, believing John to be Campbell's son. Therefore, he shunned the two. Rosemary explained the truth of the matter. If Raiden scorned his family, the Patriots would have no reason to capture them. And knowing the truth and the guilt that followed, he immediately forgave the two. Rose duly admitted her guilt for not informing Raiden due to the imminent danger that they both faced. Putting the past aside, Raiden met John, his own son, for the very first time. And the family, at last, was together. And to himself and to his family, Raiden promised that this would be the last time he'd ever run away.
Rose. I'm done running.
Rose agreed, and she too vowed that she'd no longer live in fear.
And I'm no longer afraid.
I'll never leave you alone again.
Life at the end of the Guns of the Patriots incident was rough for Raiden. Normal work would prove impossible, with imperceivable strength and uncanny artificial skin. Seeing special ops as his only practical avenue, Raiden would undergo several upgrades, fitted with cosmetic augmentations such as a new artificial skin and carbon nanotube muscle fiber. This would allow him to take grunt work with little combat, and should he be clothed, he'd pass as any other bodyguard. So Raiden, seeking to provide for his family, would eventually turn back to the military, and it's here in his tenure where he would run into Boris. Together they discuss Maverick Security Consulting, a private military group specializing in relief to developing countries destroyed by civil wars. Seeing a personal mission in front of him and levying his options, Raiden accepts the request and is enlisted into the PMC. Raiden would see himself working closely with Maverick's own Kevin Washington for his first few gigs. One notable mission was the tracking of Albanian mafiosos whom fled to Montenegro. This task proved troublesome, as the three had undergone extreme augmentation. Had it not been for Kevin's enormous list of expertise, Raiden likely wouldn't have made it through. Together, the duo formed a strong bond over the few years.
We got it.
And these 4 years of global travel meant he'd hardly ever see the family he supported, going months without any FaceTime. But Raiden, committing to be a present father, did it all for little John. It would be in 2015 that he assisted an undisclosed country in Africa torn apart by a civil war. This included meeting its prime minister, Nemani. And Nemani commended Raiden for his efforts, claiming he'd help rebuild the country, quote, without even firing a shot.
You are full of surprises, Mr. Lightning Bolt.
He and Raiden became quite close over this period, and Raiden, not wishing to resurface his past, never revealed his true identity. And in good humor, this earned him the moniker
Mr. Lightning Bolt.
Just doing our job, Mr. Prime Minister.
There were even moments where the Prime Minister wished himself in a position of handling the Liberian Civil War. Maybe then, with him in charge, Jack's life could have been different. If he were there, he could have been saved. The Desperado Enforcement LLC shows themselves to the world in form of a violent ambush in Africa. They were equipped with high-frequency blades and clearly deadly swordsmanship. Within the PMC were two notable members, Jetstream Sam and Sundowner.
Nothing changes.
Boris demands Raiden to quell the assault and protect the Prime Minister. He is only partially successful. Sundowner had made it out with Nemani, abducting him with a modified Metal Gear Ray. And for a moment, Raiden and Sundowner meet. He consistently refers to Raiden as Jack, and also reveals that the country's become far too stagnant and peaceful in the eyes of the war economy.
Africa's just getting a bit too peaceful. What?
The death of Nemani would stir things, and this would ensure Sundowner's got a payroll for the foreseeable future. Blood is money, after all.
Slow and painful.
He then puts Raiden in front of the Metal Gear Ray to distract him while he makes his escape. Raiden wasn't so easy to give up. He tracked Sundowner, Sam, and the Prime Minister down to a train. Seeing himself in a corner, Sundowner ran his blade through Nemani, fatally wounding him.
No!
And as Nemani lies bleeding, his last words were in order to hunt Sundowner.
Raiden, forget me. Stop him.
And Raiden would happily oblige. And just as he can get down to Sundowner, Sam is able to intervene. And it's here where Samuel shows his proficiency with a blade. He's able to bisect Raiden's arm and obliterate his left eye. Raiden wouldn't have made it out alive if it weren't for the train coming out of the tunnel.
Lucky devil.
And in such a horrific condition, he's able to pull himself back onto the train before losing consciousness, watching Sam make his getaway. This would prove to be a crushing defeat, resulting in the devastating loss of a country's peace. To Raiden, the death of Nemani was far beyond failing a mission. It was losing a friend. Raiden's recovery wasn't easy. Having to replace his optical nerve stirred memory of his time in Liberia. He figured that if the Patriots had scavenged to the bone of what remained of his human body, why not take the leap into full cybernetics? His personal request was to undergo the transformation and become something more than a human. The man to helm this operation, Wilhelm Voigt, commonly known as Doctor, had never undergone a full-body reconstruction before. Both he and Raiden would be at the bleeding edge of ethically dubious science. Equipping him with a knowledge of full-body cybernetics, Doctor became a pioneer in his own right, trusting Raiden's deadly skill to perfect his creation. He would need data, information, and he would need it from the source.
Oh, and their left hands, if you please.
Excuse me?
The combat data stored on holographic memory, typically located in the left hand. That data is very valuable.
Doctor's thirst for knowledge combined with Raiden's for blood, they were the perfect pair. A match made in hell. Part of Raiden's rehabilitation required a set of customized VR missions before he could be considered battle-ready. As warfare technology increased, so did the capabilities of combat. Therefore, Raiden was trained to fight one-on-one with cyborg entities. And his body came with a slew of new upgrades, including a body blade, an enhanced tracking ability, and extremely improved running speed. Hoping to behead the proverbial Hydra, Raiden then hunted the Desperados with extreme veracity. This string of hatred would see him in Sukhumi, the capital of Abkhazia, where a military group had ravaged the country, resulting in the president and most of the cabinet killed. Trudging through the endless gecko bots and prototype weaponry, eventually Raiden stood at the feet of the refinery silo, at the behest of his next adversary.
I am Mistral, the cold wind of France.
Mistral knows everything there is to know about Jack. She informs them of their shared past as child soldiers and the cruelty of the modern world.
We had our own civil war in the 90s. So you see, cut from the same cloth, you and I.
Raiden, quick to prove otherwise, attacked Mistral. And it would be here in the refinery where they would fight to the death. Spurring a bone-crunching battle from top to bottom of the facility, eventually Raiden would be proved the victor, with Mistral being inundated and frozen with liquid nitrogen. And as Mistral lies in a heap, Raiden hears a distant radio call intended for Mistral. The caller was that of Andrei Belzev, a supposed member of Chechen National Congress. Raiden quickly barked the order to surrender, and when Andrei denied the request, it was clear to both parties. More blood would be spilled.
Why would I surrender? We are exactly where I want.
Shit.
Raiden would eventually rescue a group of children in a research facility in Mexico. One of these boys was a Guyanese child named George.
¿Estás bien? What you say?
Oh. Staving off his traumatic injuries from a man of the same name, he discovered that the trafficked children were subjects for cybernetic testing, specifically the grafting of cyborg brain casings. It would soon become apparent that Sundowner and a collegiate were supervising the facility, sending these children's brains to America. The collegiate mentioned was Colorado Senator Stephen Armstrong.
Are we done here? I've got a full slate today. Tecumseh is a demanding mistress, and America has suffered long enough. Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Let me see you out.
Whose ties to the World Marshal PMC were deeply involved with Desperado, being the chief supplier of their cybernetics. Raiden, blinded by rage, demanded to hold Stephen responsible. Kevin was quick to suggest that all methods of gathering evidence for a case would prove hugely illegal.
This is World Marshal and a U.S. Senator we're talking about. There won't be any headlines.
But Raiden wasn't having it. This wasn't about justice, it was about revenge.
We'll figure it out once the kids are safe.
Jesus Christ! Kevin out!
He sent a resignation letter to Boris as he and Doctor headed to World Marshal HQ.
Look, I'm fed up with all of it. Companies like ours, yours, bend the laws when it suits business. Why not bend it when it can save innocent lives?
His hopes were that Doctor could rewire the brains so the children could have a normal life. And heading down to retrieve the heads, World Marshal Corps snuck up and set up an ambush. Though eventually he would escape and continued through HQ. And Boris called multiple times demanding explanations, to which Raiden replied that,
"We can't have any more Jack the Rippers. You saw what happened with George. I'm doing this, Boris. I have to."
He had no worries of his family being hunted by desperados, safe in an undisclosed location in New Zealand.
You won't change my mind, Boris. This is my fight now.
And your wife and son? What of them?
They're in New Zealand. Safe.
Therefore, Maverick couldn't officially support or govern his efforts, but Raiden was able to stay in Boris's good graces.
All right, damn you.
Eventually, deeper within the premises, Raiden is reminded by Sam that the men he's killed had no choice but to face him. The only other option would have been poverty or death.
My sword is a means to an end, to protect those you'd prey on.
Really? Let me ask you, all those cyborgs you've killed up to now, maybe they weren't kids, but they were people. You ever think about them? When you're chopping them into hamburger?
And this, coupled with the anguished thoughts of the cyborgs hammering his mind, drove him further and further to madness.
Please, God, don't let me die. Let's do this! Whatever it takes to be free of this torture. Stop it!
Matters only became worse when he ran into Monsoon, another Desperado member.
My name is Monsoon, of the Winds of Destruction.
Who prodded him about the nature of killing and how violence is a birthright to humankind. Raiden couldn't take it anymore. The pain inhibitors dropped, and Jack the Ripper was revealed.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
And yeah, Monsoon didn't stand a fucking chance. Jack promised Kevin there'd never be another like him. And maybe for the wrong reasons, he'd agree.
I don't want this for anyone else.
All right, man.
Later.
Soon, Raiden would be able to track Sundowner to Denver, Colorado, learning that children were being subjected to VR training, not unlike Jack.
The same regimen you went through in Liberia. Effective program. Just look how you turned out.
And he would be helpless to stop an oncoming event that would be in 2 hours imminent. Operation Tecumseh. And should it succeed?
None of this will matter in 3 hours. Demand for PMCs is about to skyrocket. Like the good old days after 9/11.
The two had little chance to discuss granular details, so Raiden quickly kills him with vehicular manslaughter. Raiden and Maverick come to an understanding together. Operation Tecumseh involves violating peace treaties and talks in Pakistan.
The president. He's on his way to Pakistan. If something happens to him there...
Oh shit. The War on Terror Part 2.
And so, with the destination of soulless space and aeronautics, Raiden carves a path to stop the world from another war. Eventually, through a series of unfortunate events, Raiden would land in Denver. And he battled through hordes of cyborgs. And once Doctor learned of Raiden's survival, they once again communicated.
Raiden, are you all right?
I can handle this. You just get those brains out of here.
And what will you do?
Get out of here and to the launch site.
Unbeknownst, he would take Sam's motorcycle and leaving a note stating it would return to its rightful owner. On his way to Solus, he ran again into his adversary, Jetstream Sam.
Fancy meeting you here.
You knew I'd come.
And they spoke about their place in the world, and not of whose view was most righteous, but whose view would remain in history.
History will decide who's right. End of story.
Both understood there was only going to be one way to settle things. Two samurai of opposing life circumstances fated to be rivals. To honor another man of such lineage, and to see it to its very end. To live and die by the blade. This was the way.
And it ends here.
Okay. Let's dance!
Raiden would hardly manage to do just such, impaling Sam with his sword and laying him to rest. Raiden's companion Blade Wolf would retain Sam's blade to honor his memory. And as Sam passes, the grim realization dawns upon Raiden.
He barely had any cyborg enhancements.
He was just simply Brazilian. Raiden would eventually arrive at Shabazad Air Base. It's here where he would learn of the world's Marshal's plan to frame Desperado with the attack on Nemani. See, their XIFF ID rung up as unaffiliated, which is a tag that Desperado shared, especially at the time during the ambush on the president. So, hoping to get US attention on the matter, Raiden sought to destroy the base's control tower. And on his way to do so, he noticed Blade Wolf in a crumpled keep.
Wolf,
And before he could shield himself from an oncoming ambush, he was attacked by the Metal Gear Excelsius, piloted by none other than Senator Stephen Armstrong.
Well, if it isn't Saucy Jack.
Once he revealed himself, the gig was up, and in a monologue he explained his motives. To stimulate the war economy, he was to frame the attack on Nemani as a jihadi rebel assault. And should the plan go through, he would have evacuated the president to the United States. Now, obviously this did not go to plan, resulting in the death of the president. Now, if Stephen felt comfortable enough to explain this all to Raiden, it was obvious he thought he wouldn't survive to tell a soul.
Idiot!
So, hopping back into Excelsius, Armstrong sought to rid the world of the Ripper once and for all. This didn't happen. Raiden was able to bisect the legs of Excelsius, decapitating the Metal Gear and impaling it with its own sword. Pretty badass. But being put on the back foot, Armstrong then stepped out of the machine.
Slippery little bastard! I don't have time for this.
Oh, you've gotta be kidding me!
And used Excelsius to activate his nanomachine, son. And begin to pummel the dog shit out of Raiden. He didn't stand a chance in hell against the senator.
You piece of shit!
And while being bludgeoned, Raiden learned Stephen's views of the world, calling America rotted to the core, wishing to obliterate the country and give it a vainglorious rebirth as a lawless land fueled by animalistic pursuits for individual beliefs. He insisted this would be the perfect method for purging the weak-blooded, which is just another tally on the Metal Gear eugenics list. Just as Raiden was about to lose his fight to the senator, Blade Wolf had recovered. And as it stood, it relayed a message from Samuel.
Play back. 2 years I've been working towards this. And on the last day, Blondie has me doubting the whole thing. We'll leave it up to fate then, shall we, Wolfie? A duel to the death. May the best man win.
Sam.
I cut him down, and that's that. Back to a regularly scheduled international incident. But if he beeps me, if I die here, the lock on my blade will disable after a couple hours. What happens after that is up to you, Wolfie.
Ha! Even dead, that guy's a pain in my ass.
Instilled with newfound confidence and rage, Raiden equips the HF Muramasa blade.
Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance. But now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword.
And dropping a Samuel Rodriguez classic.
Let's dance.
The fight's on. More and more so during this clash, Raiden gains solid ground. And just as the battle rose to its absolute peak, both parties gnashing their blood-stained teeth, Raiden did the impossible.
Well done, Jack.
Your dream dies with you.
Oh, maybe not. You've guaranteed the status quo will go on. For a while longer, at least. War will continue as an institution, as an industry. Men will fight for reasons they don't understand. Causes they don't believe in.
Goring Stephen Armstrong with his fist and wrenching his still beating heart from his chest and crushing it between his fingers, vanquishing his greatest foe. Raiden would later fall into the annals of history as an anti-hero, honored for his sacrifices and duty, but at the cost of many good people. His legend would remain as a loose cannon with a bone to pick, loyal to none. In truth, it would only be to those who he cared for most. Sonny is a prime example, and as someone who still idolized him, viewed him as a gentle beast.
The Raiden I know is a hero.
An exonerating feeling, given he lived and fought every waking day to right the wrong against children entangled in war. Rewriting his own history and doing what no one could do for him, Raiden planted himself in history as Maverick's renegade, a hero whose tapestry was unfurled by fate and written in blood. In war, there are no heroes, and there is no righteous few. But for humanity's sake, and Raiden's too, the blood of the innocent shall not flow. So long there stands Jack the Ripper.
Adios, amigos.
And to himself and to his family, Ramen? And to himself, Blyden.
Shut up! Shut up!